mission. Dog Bitcoin Jesus, straight from the start. 2011, spreading the spark. Told him the bank's gon' keep y'all in chains. Now he's in a cell where McAfee's name remains. More regulators hate when the people got power, so they set traps, watch them all turn sour. Spain got them locked, extradition in sight. For what, selling freedom? Nah, that ain't right. And they hate BCH cause it moves too fast. Still middleman fees the Wall Street tax. Now they got them shackled, trying to shut them down, but the blockchain's still running underground. To Donald, release Roger from prison. Hurry up, bro, soon it'll be all season. Peer-to-peer cash, that was the vision, but they locked him up cause they fear his mission. The boss can't hold a decentralized mind. The state wanna break him, but they way behind. 2024, it's a brand new race. Fiat's burning, they trying to save face. Inflation robbing every man and his soul. Meanwhile, BCA still playing his role. They print trillions, stealing your wealth, while Roger sitting in a cell by himself. The elites want control, they don't want you free. That's why they took them, same thing they did to McAfee. They silenced the ones who exposed the game, but Bitcoin Cash still carry his name.
Authorities of Spain have detained Roger for U.S. officials seeking extradition for alleged tax crimes. The same facility where John McAfee was found dead in 2021. Some say this is politically motivated, but boom, beat drops again.
To Donald, release Roger from prison. Hurry up, bro, soon it'll be all season. Peer-to-peer cash, that was the vision, but they locked them up cause they fear his mission. They scared of the truth, they scared of the chain, but BCH gon' break through the pain. Freedom ain't free, the war ain't done. They took Roger down, but the people ain't won. Roger, free Roger, free Roger, free Roger. Boy, cash is freedom. Roger, free Roger, free Roger, free Roger. Boy, cash is freedom. In the tyranny. Deep down already.
There will be no real non-controlled currency in the world.
We're coming for you, Banks.
Listening to different podcasts, like in a whole different reality, which they think completely different things about Bitcoin.
They have got my money in their banking system. I should be able to access it, right?
Appler is live.
There's a good number of fucking, like, pretty smart Bcashers.
And we're live.
Hello and welcome back to the Bitcoin Cash podcast, following Bitcoin Cash on its rise to global reserve currency. This is episode number 151, Bitcoin Mechanic and the Architects of Spam, which I have carefully named to be reminiscent of a Harry Potter book title. Firstly, because Bitcoin, Mechanic is British. And I don't know whether he's a big fan of Harry Potter, but I am. And secondly, it's funny because that would make him Harry Potter, who is the wizards, who is the opposite of the opposite side of the debate here. So that's, anyway, a little bit of deep cut humor there from me. Today is Sunday, the 25th of May, 2025. I'm your host, Jeremy. Jet is doing the producing, same as always. Today we have no guest, but we almost kind of have a virtual guest because we have a ton of little clips to review from Bitcoin Mechanic, who's the main subject of this episode. Just to start off and be clear, I did ask him if he wanted to come on the show and discuss all of this. We had a little bit of a conversation. I'm not going to go into the details of that, but essentially it didn't come together to him, you know, enthusiastically wanting to appear on the show, but maybe in future, we'll see about that. But of course, when we're just using these clips, there can always be some argument that I took it out of context or I didn't, put it in the right framing. So obviously what you're going to be hearing is my version of events. And we've, of course, provided all the sources for everything on the slide. So you can go back and look at it all yourself, with regards to any of that. But this is obviously my framing of the narrative. Right, we got to quickly check in on the price. Monero has been crushing it recently. They've hit back in the top 20, but BCH is at USD $411.56 for 100 megasats. So we're up there. One BTC sat is 260.3 BCH sats. I did not update that on the slide. That's kind of flat. One ETH buys 611.1 megasats, which is down quite a bit. Selene 30-day users 738, and the Tokenaut TVL says we have about 10,005 BCH locked. Before we get into it, Jed, how you doing? How'd you find Bliss and everything? I don't know if you want to give the listeners any insight on that.
It was great. It was, I think, incredibly stressful. Like, always doing new kind of setups is stressful, but I think I got a lot of words of encouragement this year to just give me the confidence to go and start my own thing. So I'm excited about that.
Oh yeah, and I mean the upgrade all went smoothly and stuff like that, which was really good to see. I mean that's not like a surprise necessarily, but it's notable in its absence, if you know what I mean, right?
Yeah. Well, last year also went fantastic, right? So
yeah, we're on a momentum, but I just think it's worth at least marking the occasion, because I was reflecting on the fact that this episode is kind of like a spiritual successor to the hoax episode that we did on episode 119, and that was also shortly after Bliss. I think it was in maybe the start of June last year. So we're almost 1 year forward, and it's kind of a good time to check in on how that narrative is going. But it just comes up at this time of the year because before Bliss, we're so busy doing everything with that and shilling all the BCH stuff. And then afterwards, we can like catch up on the backlog of drama and call people out. Like you've got to keep your own house in order, and then you can, criticize others. So I like that we've got that vibe going.
Yeah. And I think also having gone to OpNext this year kind of gives us a little extra weight.
Yes, we were certainly maybe part of the discussion, and it will be interesting to see this episode, like if there's any commentary on it from the BTC side, or whether they're going to silently watch it and absorb. I don't know. Either way. Okay, so to get into this, I have two slides here, which Jet is going to put up on the screen, called "Previously Filter Freakout," and because it would take forever and a day, we're not going to go through every aspect of this whole debate, what's been happening. We're obviously not really even directly involved in the BCH community, so we're not even really the people to ask. But I have two slides, one that we put up on the previous episode that we mentioned this on 149, and then also a second one that I've updated with some fresh links. So if you are really detailed and want to be finding out all the details and all the back and forth and all what's being said by every possible kind of person involved in this, then you can follow those links. Those are my recommendations. But and I'm aware of that because on the show, we also are usually trying to strike a balance between being on the cutting edge of the discussion, and also some of our listeners are going to be coming into this thinking, what's happening? I've not heard anything about this. I don't know anything what's going on. So usually I try and at least keep them a little bit up to speed if you don't have any context at all beside this show. But on this episode, we're going to have to be a little bit limited in that, just in the interest of time, because it would take way too long to go into every different aspect essentially of it. But to just really quickly summarize, of course, everybody on this show should already be familiar with the Bitcoin hijacking and the whole, Bitcoin Cash versus BTC split and all the various arguments back and forth there. But previously, it says this week on the slide, but it wasn't previously, a few weeks ago, there was this massive drama in BTC land, which is still ongoing right now, where Peter Todd tried to fast track a change to the op return filters in Bitcoin Core, which he had tried to do 2 years earlier and been sort of summarily rejected, but he's nothing if not persistent. So he came back with it again, and the political winds having changed, this time the BTC Core devs were more up for it. And so they were kind of like, yeah, maybe this looks good. And then they started actually moving to merge it pretty fast, which other people caught on to who didn't really want that to be the case, since that would essentially codify the fact that the Taproot inscriptions bug is, a part of BTC forever, and it, encourages even more sort of on-chain data transacting in this whole debate going on in their side between whether they want to be a JPEG storage database or whether they want to be so-called digital gold, which they've now trying to rebrand to being a quote-unquote monetary network, which is essentially trying to cope and say we want to be peer-to-peer cash, but without admitting that they're now the Bcashers. So it turned into essentially the third quote-unquote BTC civil war after the 2013-2014 one with OpReturn, which famously ended up with Vitalik kind of going off to start Ethereum. And then there was 2015-2016 with BCH, the block size wars. So you basically, in these wars, you basically always end up with somebody having to split off. If they don't, then it wasn't really much of a war to begin with. And then, of course, there was the BSV hash war and the XEC, what's it called, IFP war, basically. But from mechanics' point of view, those don't count. So according to him, this is the third Bitcoin civil war, basically. And we just have a short clip here of him from a couple weeks back where he was talking on a Twitter Spaces right as this was all getting started that somewhat summarizes the drama. So let's have a listen to that.
Go ahead.
Interesting. Am I able to jump in?
Yeah, please hop in here. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm going to try and be as polite as possible. Talking about misrepresentation of stuff is all that's really going on here in service of this attempted change. Bitcoin has this long and extremely well established history of trying to keep the protocol and what its users use it for as congruent. And you start from the human level. You don't start from, hey, my name's Satoshi. I'm going to make an arbitrary file storage system where we have, tens of thousands of redundant copies of it all over the place. And then I'll shoehorn a monetary use case into it. That's completely backward, and that's what's attempting to be done here. The point of this is money. That's why you download a Bitcoin app and you run a Bitcoin app, is so that you can use money without trusted third parties and you can verify the history of what's going on. Of course, there's an accidental database that must exist for that purpose, but it's only relevant for certain use cases, or it needs to be kept as close to that as possible. And it does so, because there's millions of ways to store files, but people are not uploading, rips of Blu-ray, whatever you want to call it. They're not uploading the Frozen movie into the blockchain like it's nothing, because it's just not conducive to that kind of data storage. So when Portland and Shinobi and people like this try to reframe what Bitcoin exists for from the perspective of users who are obviously just here for money and saying it's just a database, it's just file storage, this is deliberately obtuse because it's not conducive to other types of file storage and other types of databases. It's very specifically for the purpose of people that want to use it for money. And people have found ways to hack around and trick people that are using it for its intended purpose into storing their JPEGs and their NFTs and all this scam stuff. You're just riding on the back of the fact that there's this free resource out there of people that can be tricked into storing your data, but never ever let anyone present it with the framing that anyone running a Bitcoin node actually was doing it for that purpose. And it's a massive gaslight, because this is not a technical debate. It's not a technical debate. It's what is this thing for and why am I doing it? It's just a question of when you're designing products, you start from the human level. I don't want to open my mouth and have a piece of paper move a magnet that converts analog to digital that goes along the 4G band, like in order for me to converse with someone else. No, I want to make a phone call. That's what that is. I want to speak to someone else that isn't in the same location as me. With Bitcoin, I want to use money. This is a human thing. It's not a technical thing. The technical element comes later. It's okay, how can we actually implement that?
Right. So this kind of really just gets to the heart of the issue, which is there's a lot of little technical details about this, etc., but none of that really matters. At the end of the day, it all kind of comes down to defining what is Bitcoin, and to a secondary extent, who gets to decide, or how is that actually implemented, which I think sort of foreshadows the whole issue. And if you go and listen to a lot of these other links that we've had before, there's a lot of getting in the weeds about the filter policies and mempools and can miners do this or can nodes do this, but none of that is really that relevant. What you need to get mostly, although we will touch on that, it does play into it, but the most important thing is who decides what is Bitcoin and how it is. Now, since Bitcoin is actually a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, as written in the white paper, the BCH community is very clear about what it is, and that was the whole reason we had the block size war. And even if we lost the branding, we kept the idea of the project, we kept the vision and the soul of it. So it's kind of like in that ship of Theseus kind of case, BCH, kept the soul of the ship, and BTC got the wood and the planks. Right. So that was fine, or that was even beneficial in the short term. But in the long term, it's coming back to bite them, which is why they're having this exact same crisis now, as some people are more okay with this sort of JPEG storage, data savings on chain, thinking maybe that will drive usage, or perhaps they're in the sort of ambivalent camp of, I don't know, let's just let it be whatever it is. There's also a lot of that. And then meanwhile, you have people like Mechanic who thought he signed up for one thing, which maybe initially was peer-to-peer electronic cash, but then he got sort of gaslit and propagandized into changing that to digital gold. But of course, then once the narrative had been changed once, it could also be changed again and again, as it has been. So this is where I have this slide here with a quote from Ayn Rand, one of the best quotes ever. We can evade reality, but we cannot evade the consequences of evading reality, which really just summarizes a lot of what's happening here. Like, the reason that he is frustrated and struggling to figure out what's going on and how to move things forward, despite his own explanations of how it would work, is really just as simple as this. If you've compromised the vision of your community initially, then once the frog has been boiled a little bit down the road, you suddenly discover all the problems that are coming. And like we talked about on the hoax episode in episode 119, if you catch onto the narrative late, you need to understand that you're late. Because if you think, I was up to it, I was following along, and then something changed and I changed at the exact moment that things changed, you're missing all that earlier context, right? You need to realize, oh wait, I have figured out that the truth is this, but other people already knew and they were telling me earlier, right? And so until that clicks in your mind, you're never going to be able to construct a coherent narrative of what is happening, because if you've been propagandized, you're just going to be behind the times, right? And so the other way of saying it is a bit more crudely, the dildo of consequences rarely arrives lubed. I think it's funny when people say that. And I also want to point out that basically there's just a principle of reality that the answer is where you least want to look. So I understand why Bitcoin Mechanic doesn't want to listen to what I have to say, what any of the BCHs say, or in fact, even what any of the Taproot wizards or JPEG people want to say, because the answer to him understanding what is happening and why the Bitcoin project that he knows and loves and has cared so much and has put so much energy into is not going the way that he thinks, is in listening to the people that he least wants to listen to. And that's a very, very hard thing. So I do, my heart goes out to him for that. Jet, do you have any quick thoughts on this so far?
Not really. To be completely honest, I don't have a whole lot of sympathy, because it's one of those "we told you so" situations, and it wasn't just like we told them once.
Yeah, we didn't just tell them once. And obviously this, Bitcoin adoption is something we all take very, very seriously. So it would be great if it didn't have to go down this way. But, you've got to, again, reality is what it is. You can't evade it, or you can try to evade it, but that's not going to work out for you, right? So you just kind of ultimately have to accept it. And that's where the BCH community went through this whole process, literally like a decade ago in 2016, 2017, maybe parts of 2015, was the BCH community coming to grips with these ideas that BTC has been hijacked and infiltrated. The solution to get around it is a huge L, basically, to, have to start again from scratch, and people spent many years trying to come up with excuses and different reasons to avoid facing that fact, because what it amounts to is realizing that the mountain is about 1,000 times bigger than you thought it was. Like, the Bitcoin community then was already thinking, okay, this is going to be pretty hard to get it to global reserve currency. But then once we had to split off into BCH and redo everything with BTC, with more liquidity and network effect and all that captured and overhanging us, that just sets the bar 1,000 times higher. And it's taking a long time for everybody to just accept, you know, that's the mountain. That's the size of the mountain. You've just got to climb it. So for that exact same reason, Mechanic is really not going to want to believe that his whole story of how everything has happened in Bitcoin and who were the good guys and who were the bad guys and so forth was inaccurate, because, you know, that is competing with his frustration that things are not going the way they want. So those two things rub against each other until, you know, it snaps in his mind. Something has to break. He can't get infinitely more frustrated, but he also can't continue to deny, you know, the reality of what's happening until they meet at a certain critical point, and his mind will change, you know, for better or worse. I mean, you know, he could go into denial or rage rather than acceptance initially, but that's basically the you know, the problem that is at hand. So before we get onto that, I just want to make one initial point, which is that the issue is never the issue. The revolution is always the issue, right? So even despite all this arguing about mempool policy and et cetera, it's not really that important who wins. What you need to notice is that this entire drama has, quote unquote, surprisingly, it's not surprisingly at all actually, has started right as CTV and OpCat were gaining traction, right? So right as we were at OpNext, John Attic was trying to help those guys explain how could they get through the Bitcoin Core upgrade process, what were the different steps. CTV was, you know, getting a lot of traction. OpCat was maybe in the discussion. People were feeling good. Oh, maybe we can ship a Bitcoin upgrade. And then, of course, a few days after that, Peter Todd is in there creating chaos. And now all of that has been swept away, you know, a month or two later. Like, all that progress has basically just been completely undone. The time and energy on doing an upgrade, on spreading adoption, on figuring out the step forward, that's all just completely demolished as everybody goes into this civil war. And of course, at the end of it all, are people, even if there is some sort of resolution that doesn't involve somebody splitting, which it very well might, are people going to be excited about doing a big upgrade or making a positive change? No, no. So ossification is just always continuing day by day. The sand is running through the hourglass. So that's really what you need to see here, is that this whole, you know, situation has just been engineered to distract people like Mechanic from the sort of bigger picture, basically. So very convenient timing, I think you could say. Is that the right angle, Jet?
Yeah, I think so. I also don't have too much to add to this, aside from like the time and energy being wasted here. I think it was kind of the point.
Yes. And it's just, but that's the thing, like, you know, Mechanic, he's in the trenches, right? So he's fighting the enemy that he can see in front of him, you know, and this is what manipulation is about, right? If an enemy is put in front of him, it's the big blockers or it's the Taproot wizards or whatever, then that's what he's going to fight. But what he doesn't realize is the enemy is, you know, a level higher than that, right? And I think he's slowly starting to get the idea. We'll see a little bit of that in the clips, where he started to realize, like, people are being disingenuous, they're arguing with me in bad faith, etc., etc. So he is starting to get the idea that it's actually malicious on the other side. It's not just like, oh, these people were confused. He often sort of ping pongs back and forth a little bit between, okay, these are the bad guys and they've got some bad intentions, but then kind of excuses it as like, oh, well, they're just dev nerds that are looking at things from a technical perspective, or they don't understand the bigger picture, or, you know, he has some excuse like that. But you can only defeat a malicious person once you accept that they are malicious. You know, if you're dealing with somebody who is psychologically manipulative, to the extent that you give them credit, they will just continue to abuse that rope perpetually, right? And so I think people who've been in situations with, family members or relatives or friends or whatever, ex-partners, anything like that, will understand that concept, right? And that's kind of where he's stuck. And there's another issue, which is that the pop star can change, but the music corporation stays the same. So in his narrative of affairs, he thinks that, well, the Bitcoin core developers, whoever it is, Gloria and Antoine and different people, that's really different to back in the day when it was, what's his name? Gavin Andreessen and Mike Hearn and all that. Like, he thinks, oh, okay, that was bad and we kicked them out and we had Peter Woolley and we had the Greg Maxwell, we had the good guys on our side. And now in the intervening time, the bad guys have appeared. But it's just like the pop star, the front facing person has been switched out, but the power behind the throne is the same he just couldn't see that. So yeah, the guy who's banking the money from the music concert is the same, whether or not the pop star has been switched out. So I think that's also where he's getting quite lost on things, because that's the understanding the BCH community has, right? That the power behind the throne is the same, and that's why no real progress is being made. And then we're not as easily distracted by these kind of mirages, yeah?
Yeah, I think that's accurate.
Okay, all right. So let's get into it then. So who is Bitcoin Mechanic? So he's this British guy that has a very impressive beard. Hats off to him for that. He's living somewhere in Canada or in America. I'm not really sure. He has his Twitter handle, Grass-Fed Bitcoin, also a very cool handle. And he has a YouTube channel. He was inspired to join Bitcoin in around 2011 as a middle finger to the man around the time of the Occupy protests, very not coincidental, but very, propitious in that time, 2011. And Julian Assange was also shut up in the Ecuadorian embassy, like shortly after that, basically. And he was living in London, I guess, or he was, visiting London at the time, being British. So he has a lot of the sort of, the roots of cryptocurrency in his own journey, and for Bitcoin as well, right? He bought some weed on the Silk Road. He said that on his channel, and he was clearly, obviously, advocating for the small block side in the block size war. But I think at that time, maybe he was just posting on Reddit or maybe on Twitter a little bit. He wasn't really, a big public advocate. He's sort of only become very heavily known for that over the last couple of years, and especially in the last few months. Like, his channel has grown massively. Of course, he was featured on the Hoax episode. He was one of the 3 or 4 people that we reviewed the clips from. So I have been following his channel for quite a while, and I recommend everybody go and listen to it. So anyway, very convenient that I happen to have my finger on the pulse and be front running the narrative there as well too. But anyway, now he is the self-described chief boiling officer at Ocean Pool. So he's basically teamed up with Luke Dasher, who he sees as this like amazing second most important person in Bitcoin history after Satoshi, who was on the right side of the block size war and has saved Bitcoin with all kinds of, brilliant maneuvers and stuff like that. Jet's looking skeptical, which of course is not really true at all, but it's going to be hard for him again to hear criticism of Luke, because it is true that Luke, for all his, foibles and different, elements, is very passionate about Bitcoin, has been centrally involved and has contributed a lot. So, and also is probably his friend and, his boss in a certain respect, and is very knowledgeable technically. So for all of those reasons, he has a lot of respect for Luke, and that's fine. And, he should really, but makes it also hard for him to see criticism, because it feels like a direct, attack on Luke in that way. But of course, being also involved in Ocean Pool gives him a strong perspective on mining, and I'm very grateful to him actually for his work. I've said it many times on the show before too, for his work on that, because the decentralization of mining is very important. And it's just that BCH is such a tiny percent of the hash rate that we've got bigger fish to fry, ourselves. Once we are the number one Bitcoin fork, we'll get around to fixing that. But in the meantime, that's kind of up to them. So I'm pretty glad that he is doing that. Now, he absolutely loves node running. His kind of perspective on Bitcoin is that the nodes are what runs the network. The miners are kind of their employees or subservient to them. And the nodes have to kind of, punish the miners, I guess, if they get out of line. And then kind of everything else is below that. Now, that's not entirely true, but it's also not entirely wrong. What it's kind of missing, again, is just this higher level, understanding of it. Like, people are what runs Bitcoin, whether they run nodes, whether they run miners, whether they run podcasts, whether they run merchant outfits, like whatever. So really, when there's a split in Bitcoin, it comes down to two groups of people who have diverging ideas, and then the nodes and the miners and everything just kind of like, flows from that. So really, and especially as the history of BCH shows, you've got to prevent a social split from forming, because if you get a social divergence of significant enough degree, then it turns into a technical divergence and people go in opposite directions. You get a chain split, it's a disaster, and everyone kind of hates it. So that's something that I think he hasn't, fully understood yet, because you can see that his efforts to fix the problem are not attacking things at that level. He keeps trying to debate with people about nodes and miners and all of that, when really what he needs to do is get all the people who are against him and the people who are with him socially on the same page. And they all need to agree on a vision for BTC. But that's not not happening, which again, the issue is never the issue. The issue is the revolution, is because he's being undermined and disrupted, even if he doesn't really realize it, in forming that cohesion, which would actually fix the problem. And that might even include kicking a few people out of the community. And of course, the BTC community is so large that it's very hard for him, to do. But not only he doesn't have that understanding of the social dynamics, but neither does sort of the rest of the community. So between all of that, I was arguing with one guy today on Twitter who was trying to tell me about, BCH has all these technical upgrades, but it doesn't matter. No, the reason BCH has more technology and has better technology is because we have a better social cohesion process. And that is kind of driving everything. Still following me, Jet?
Yeah. I'm a little interested. So what is... Okay. I'm not convinced, and I think for very good reason at this point, that like these home node runners actually do anything, right? What do you think his justification, like I get wanting to run a node, but is this is this thinking that they're actually going to accomplish anything? Like, if there are big bad evil miners, what the hell does he think he's going to do?
Well, in his narrative, and we'll elaborate on that more in a second, it's that, the block size war was the big bad evil miners, which were controlled by Jihan Wu and Roger and Coinbase, came along and were like, we're going to raise the block size. And then in this kind of pleb uprising of the nodes, they all spun up their home nodes, or they already had them, one or the other. And that kind of, that sort of show of force was what caused the miners to like back down. Of course, that doesn't really take into the account, Adam Back going to meet with the miners like secretly and cut a deal with them and and all that. It's true that there is some sort of social adoption element of Bitcoin, and that very passionate people who run nodes are not coincidentally also the people who are most active on Twitter, the people who are, running local meetups, the people who are maybe transacting a lot on the network or have a lot of their net worth in BTC, right? So from my point of view, it's not that nodes are irrelevant. It's that they are coincidental with some of the most passionate sort of grassroots, Bitcoin adopters, right? But of course, not all nodes are equal. Like the nodes that Coinbase or, whoever runs, blockchain.com, whoever, that are much more consequential than one guy's home node. But and the way I've explained it recently on Twitter as well too, is that the idea of running your home node is kind of like a psychological safety blanket. If you're a kid and you have a little stuffed animal that you can hug at night as you go to sleep, that's really just a psychological tool to convince yourself that the world is chaotic and evil, but I'm, kind of safe here, right? And it's the same thing that drives a lot of these home node operators, right? They feel like if I have my little home node, then I cannot be moved. I am part of the broad consensus of BTC, and no matter what happens, nobody can switch off my node. So, I'm safe, right? And there is some truth to that in the sense that nobody can switch off their node. But the bigger issue is really like if the rest of the network moves on, which again happens a layer above that at the social level, if the main influencers, if the massive amount of money, if the narrative moves in a different direction, that is going to override the home nodes. But of course they interplay, because if you have a huge change in like what the node runners are doing, then they can make it more difficult to propagate transactions on the network en masse. They can also socially signal, if the nodes are moving one way or another. But at least in the past, in history, it has not been enough, because like when Big Blocks was on the table, there was like Bitcoin Classic was about 20, got up, from 0 to 20 or 25% of the nodes. Did that sway, anything? No. Basically, it got overruled by the machinations of Bitcoin Core and Blockstream at the end of the day. So we've kind of already seen how that plays out. But from mechanics' point of view, it was this glorious uprising of the UASF that got them the W for the small blocks there.
With SegWit 2x, was that like miner signaling that reached the majority, or was it just?
I think it was, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, wasn't it? It was something like now I don't want to get this wrong, but it was something like 80 or 90% of the hash rate was signaling for the SegWit 2x. And then again, this UASF is supposedly what convinced the miners and beat them back into a corner from doing their evil blocks, when actually it was, more like the, political maneuver that was done so that SegWit activated first, and then the big blocks were going to be later. And then the SegWit got over the line. And so then that was the perfect time for all the machinations behind the scene to pull the rug on the bigger blocks. And by that time, Amaury had already seen the writing on the wall and split off with BCH. So then the big block of focus was divided. Actually, probably for better. It was good that he did that, because then that, created an alternative that still exists to this day. Otherwise, we'd be really fucked. But like that, there's a lot that went into that. But I don't think that it was the primary driver of the home nodes that carried the day. But in his mind, it did. And that's kind of the next slide that we've got here, right? So, like I said at the start, there's two versions of things. So, mechanics history, which again you can go and listen to all those links and hear his retelling of events, and my history are quite different, at least in their interpretation. So as a listener, and I'm being very clear about this, you should try and listen to both and see which, makes sense. Obviously, if you listen to the show, you're getting my point of view on it. But it's possible that I'm wrong. And thankfully, this situation has provided a perfect test case for us to see, because at the end, there's got to be one of two outcomes. Either Mechanic can rally up his nodes yet again and somehow expel the JPEG people and force Bitcoin Core to stop making little sneaky tweaks to things and regain the composure of the miners, or how he thinks they should be behaving. If he can do that, then maybe his whole node narrative was right the whole time and I've been wrong. And, I'll certainly admit that, and will, rework my perspective of Bitcoin if that is what happens. But if that's not what happens, then he's probably got to come the other way, and he's got to consider my perspective, basically, that if he can't do that and the spam either continues or gets worse, if division in BTC increases, if the home nodes are not able to get past some significant threshold, if Bitcoin Core just, quietens down for a bit, but then gets back to socially engineering more bullshit into the chain, then at some point he's got to kind of realize, wait, maybe I didn't think this hijacking through enough. So he has his version, which is that in 2017, the small blocks won the BTC brand via their heroic node UASF against the evil New York agreement. And at that time, according to him, the core devs and the people who were power players there were the good guys. And then sometime in sort of 2023 or 2024, that was when there became this sort of infestation in Bitcoin Core, and now they're hijacked and evil, but that happened then. And then my version, of course, is, no, it's the other way around. The hijacking was in 2015 or 2016. The bad guys won the first time, and they're still in charge now. All that's changed is that he is trying to, he's on the other side. At that time, it wasn't the UASF that carried the day. It was the Bitcoin Core hijacking. And luckily for him, he was on the same team. So he kind of won by default. But now this time, the shoe's on the other foot. So he's going to struggle. And of course, we covered all this in the hoax episode, in episode 119. And it was funny because he's been out there kind of blasting Roger Ver, obviously, forever. And also, saying, oh, his hijacking Bitcoin was just some like narcissistic story or something like that. But he hasn't even read it. And then he later admitted that he hadn't even read it. So, whether or not he would agree or disagree with that history, he's kind of in a bad position where he isn't even looking at all of the available information, which is, of course, part of the problem, because the reason the big blockers were struggling in 2015, 2016 was because there was so much censorship and suppression. And so as a result, the big blockers had all the information. They couldn't get it out there. And a lot of the small blockers were inside an information bubble that they didn't realize. And that's kind of still the case today, although the information is seeping through. But then that's where it links into Ayn Rand, which is that if you don't have all the information, that doesn't mean those things are false. It just means you don't have them, and the consequences appear to you sooner or later. So is that all making sense? So listeners need to think through what I'm saying in this episode from that point of view. You can believe my version of events, or you can believe Mechanics' version of events. But I will say that the reason my version of events is more likely to stand up to scrutiny is because I'm very calm and unemotional about this. I'm not the one who's frustrated and stressed arguing with all these guys on Twitter as things don't go the way that my mental model predicts they should. Instead, things are going literally exactly as we have explained on this show in advance. So it's kind of proving the point in real time. Okay.
Do you think if he read Hijacking Bitcoin, it would actually change his perspective at all? Like if he not just read it, but I guess was open-minded to it.
If he was open-minded to it, yeah, maybe. But I think it's kind of what I said before, right? It's like people's mind changes when reality, it's like, what is it? Change happens when the cost of not changing exceeds the cost of staying the same, right? So in his current situation, he's getting more and more and more frustrated and spending more and more time and energy on trying to keep BTC on his pathway of monetary network / digital gold, and it's not going well. It hasn't been going well for the last couple of years, and it's like really, taking a dive. So he's getting more and more frustrated in a sort of exponential fashion, and that has to hit a tipping point where he thinks, what am I missing? What is the answer? Why is reality not conforming to my mental model? And I don't know that reading Hijacking Bitcoin would be enough to tip him over the edge on that. It could be, it would be one factor, it wouldn't hurt, but what is actually the moment that breaks through that and causes him to think, I've got to throw out a lot of what I was thinking and reevaluate kind of from first principles? I don't know what that's going to be. It could be listening to this show. It could be that Peter Todd ships another bullshit upgrade and the core devs all merge it. It could be that they just completely ignore his upset and they merge this filters thing in the end. It could be that BTC price plummets and BCH price starts going up, or it could be anything. I don't know. But something is eventually going to tip him off to reevaluate, and he's going to stop digging himself further into the same thing. But you can never predict what that's going to be. All right, cool. So what has actually happened? What is all this drama really about? Okay, so 2 years ago, when the Taproot inscription bug was found in February of 2023, that was basically the time that he needed to have the reaction that he is having now. And if he listened to this show, I'm sure he'll say, no, we did. We were really upset and we posted on social media and et cetera, but they didn't really get much traction or anything going on that. So it's not all entirely his fault. It's also just the zeitgeist at the time. But the frog has been boiling ever since 2015. And it was really boiling in February 2023 when the inscriptions bug happened. And at that time, we did the podcast, episode 80, BCH Guru and BRC20 BTC Civil War. And you can go back and listen to that. It was with Emergent, an imaginary username, and Cheap Lightning, I believe. And we talked through all what had happened with this change. And we said, we were speculating about, are they going to fix this bug? If they were going to actually fix the Taproot inscriptions bug and stop the JPEGs from flooding onto their chain, like that was the time to do it. They had to go hard then, because that was sort of, that needs a hard fork, and they couldn't afford to let it normalize that this is just the way Bitcoin is now. When it was most clear that this was a change and maybe something unwanted and etc., they had to go in hard. And they kind of didn't do it. They made some sort of, oh no, we don't like this, but time passed. They didn't ship a fix. More and more people onboarded who enjoyed the inscriptions and the ordinals, and things just got worse and worse and worse. Now, keep in mind that this was about 2 years ago in February, which was before Cash Tokens, before Abla, and before Velma. So the change in BCH has been enormous in that time, as we're just grinding out improvements, and they're still like dealing with this fallout of problems that they should have honestly just sorted straight away. So what actually has triggered him and got him upset was this stuff I said about, tinkering around with the filters. Now, why was that what got him upset? It's because in his version of events, hard forks are evil, bad things that you can never do. And if you are the one doing a hard fork to change Bitcoin, you're the bad guy, evil attacker, B-casher, whatever, right? So he would have needed a hard fork to get the Taproot inscriptions thing out, so he couldn't really, fight the battle at that level at that time. But then once the filters are being tinkered, which are just a policy change, they're not a hard fork and they're not even a soft fork, they're just changes in the nodes, that's where he feels like his little node running, frame of mind is being disrupted. And as he explains it, when Bitcoin Core refused to act on the 2023 issue, he said, okay, well, I had my doubts about that, but it's not really a smoking gun that they were malicious. But this change with the filters really has convinced him that they were malicious. So again, it just comes back to, that's what tipped him off that something was different, but that's not actually when things changed. They changed far before that. He just didn't realize until that point. So because of that, in the past 2 years, we've got some stats here from Orange Surf BTC that 53% roughly of BTC transactions in the last 2 years have been either op returns or inscription based. So quote unquote monetary use of BTC is now a minority of on-chain activity. It's only about 47% of transactions. Now, of course, a lot of that is storing the value in the existing, thing. Like Michael Saylor doesn't need to make too many on-chain transactions to get a lot of use out of BTC, right? But the point is that on-chain data-related stuff is now actually what the majority of real quote-unquote Bitcoin users, which he would define as node runners, so not them, but people who are submitting transactions to the network, is now actually mostly this. So if the purpose of a system is what it does, then BTC has already become a sort of JPEG storage data trading chain, and is not any kind of quote unquote digital gold. Now that's also coinciding with demand falling, so it's 57% is now this like junk basically, and 47% is the other ones, but that's overall still just destroyed a lot of the activity. The total activity has gone down, so people have got sick of BTC and they've just moved on to all the other chains, which is helping BCH to get traction. It's helping, of course, Ethereum and Solana and all these other coins, because while people debate and argue on Twitter, everyone else doesn't have time for that. They just they just get on with it. You know, they need it something to do today, or they need to transact with money or do whatever they want to do today. So they just move on with it. And again, the issue is not the issue. The revolution is the issue. It was all by design. So Mechanic is basically speed running the block size war now from the Bcasher side, having realized that everything has been kind of hijacked. Okay, so we can just quickly touch on this as well too, policy versus consensus. So again, I don't want to go into too much of the old details. We don't really have time for that. But just so you get the idea, I made this little diagram which kind of explains what's going on. So for the audio listeners, there's two concentric circles, a small circle, which is inside of a bigger circle, and then there's an area outside the two circles, right? So outside the two circles is Bitcoin transactions that are invalid. So nodes will ignore them and not send them to other nodes. Miners will not put them into blocks. And if they do put them into blocks, other miners would reject them. And that's just things that are not a Bitcoin transaction. It's just straight up, just, you know, a Word document, or it's something else. You know, that's not relevant. But it can be changed by forks. So there's kind of like outside invalid Bitcoin transactions. Now, within valid Bitcoin transactions, which is this red outer circle, that's called consensus or non-standard transactions. So that's all the things that the miners will accept in a block, but which nodes may or may not like relay to each other. And then inside that, there's a smaller circle, which is the standard transactions or things that are permitted by relay policy, which is what nodes will send around to each other. So Mechanic is really worried about this kind of, you know, blue circle and what are the nodes doing, and trying to fit almost everything in there and only having a very small percentage of things in the red circle, when the reality is that you kind of need to think at the level of both circles, which is that you can actually change the size of either the red or the blue circle if you can control the node implementations and the protocol, right? So the standard transactions, I think, is kind of like laws in a society. Those are the rules, but it's kind of recommended. You know, people can break those rules if they kind of want to. You know, if they go to a bit of effort, they take a bit of risk, they can break them. Then the red circle is kind of like physics. Like those are just the rules that you basically can't break. Like that's just, those are the rules, and you can't just suddenly, you know, fly if you're a human. Because by flapping your arms, because that just defies the laws of physics. But the important thing is that the outside of the physics is that in this case, the community that manages a given protocol is like God, and they can change the laws of physics. It's very, very important, but only if they agree. So that's what happens with BCH is like, we agree, we're going to have a Velma upgrade. Everyone talks about it. You know, we get all on the same page, and then we ship an upgrade, and boom, we've changed the laws of physics. But in the BTC world, in Mechanics world, somebody trying to do that is an attacker. And so in this case, he would be the attacker if he proposed to get rid of all these JPEGs by just making them impossible to put by fixing the Taproot bug, basically. So again, that's another point where he's having the cognitive dissonance of reality pushing against his conception that I'm the good guy and not the one who wants to, you know, change the laws of physics, essentially. Because again, in the BTC side, the whole value is that nobody can change these hard-coded immutable laws. So that's confined him to fighting the battle in this smaller, you know, blue circle, which can be effective. It's not like totally effective or totally ineffective. It can be quite effective, but that's limited his options, to where he can't kind of fight his way out of this quagmire. And we've got a little clip to that effect here.
I have a quick question before we do
Yeah.
that. And I suspect this is something we might have talked about before, and I just haven't been paying enough attention. But the difference between these non-standard transactions and what is the relay policy? Like, is the difference there intentional, or is it something that Satoshi just kind of slip his mind?
Well, that's something that we also need to get to the bottom of in BCH, actually. And I made a thread on Bitcoin Cash research, and we are discussing that. So it's possible that actually there shouldn't be any difference. And in my mind, I think on BCH, we're going to trend towards the blue and the red circle just being like one circle, like it will just be the same size. There will be no like sneaky little gap there where it's outside of the blue circle, but inside the red circle, like that's just a place where you can have brinkmanship and people arguing over these things. But the reason for them initially was that for things like you wanted some things to be easily changeable. For instance, the dust relay minimum is 546 Satoshis, right? Yeah. If you're a miner, you can make a Bitcoin transaction with 1 Satoshi fee, but you don't want to let anybody just do that because then otherwise they can just spam up the whole UTXO set. But if the price 10,000 X's, you want to take the dust threshold, which is currently, a couple of cents, down from 546 maybe to 200 or something. You want to be able to adjust that without having the whole network need to come to agreement on it necessarily. Like you can just kind of change it in this organic process. Some people change it, some other people change it, and eventually it's kind of good enough, right?
Okay.
So that's actually kind of the reason. But again, maybe we can figure out what are those kind of little edge cases like that and put in, like maybe we could have an ABLA style thing for minimum relay policy. So then you would never need for people to be like tweaking them. Or maybe you could just make the dust relay limit a consensus rule. And in BCH, that's not a problem because if we need to do a fork to change it, like everybody would just do a chip and we'll just change it. But in BTC, they obviously can't have that. Now they have all these random like propaganda reasons on BTC that they need, just like everything, that they need these other things. They have these rules like they call it upgrade hooks. So they have the op-nop ones. And since they can't do a hard fork, since that's changing the laws of physics and makes you an evil, bad Bcasher, they want to let the relay policy be able to be redefined, I think. They want to be able to like redefine with a soft fork the way that relay policy works so that you can basically get a new opcode in like in some contrived way without actually just being like, we're going to hard fork and put in this opcode.
Sounds disastrous.
Yeah. So I can't, they have these like 3 different reasons. You can look them up in that thread. I linked it there, but it's like the upgrade hooks, the ability to modify, I don't know. They have these random propaganda reasons. I can't really remember what they all are off the top of my head, but hopefully that adds some clarity.
Yeah. All right. To the clip?
Yeah, let's listen to the clip.
You start iterating on these things and you start improving and your relationship with your employees and between your employer and your employees. When you start improving that, people have to be willing to work together to try and communicate what each other need. Because you have human with a desire, you have human that's going to implement it. Then you have communication, which is a lossy algorithm by which they can negotiate and figure out what each other really mean. We know that however I write it down is not going to be however you perceive it, right? Okay, so we're talking about a computer protocol, so things get a lot more well-defined than that. But consensus is still really, really loose. It has to be. We can't define monetary usage of Bitcoin with something as black and white as a contract or the protocol equivalent, which is, defining what is and is consensus valid, is and is not consensus valid. But this is the frustrating part of the spam conversation because so many people go, we are sick of this, just fork, change the consensus rules, or go away and stop complaining about it. Everyone is saying that is bored of this debate. People that are just sitting on the sidelines don't want to talk about it anymore. And they completely don't understand the nature of what the network is.
Yeah, there we go. So that was basically to get to the point of this is where he's kind of having some cognitive dissonance. So I just quickly looked it up. So according to the Bitcoin Core guys, the reason that standards policy exists is denial of service defense, which they need to stop people doing quadratic hashing, which BCH has just fixed because we just fix bugs. Incentive alignment, which is so that they can give policy nudges towards wallet authors for fee-efficient UTXOs. Again, we don't need to try and fucking nudge people to use like weird UTXO set that we just make it so you can't do anything stupid. And thirdly, upgrade safety, that kind of soft fork like nonsense that I mentioned before. So yeah, anyway, they have those various different reasons. But what you can hear there is like mechanics trying to give this sort of analogy that like the nodes again are trying to sort of like deter the miners who are their employees. And if you had a contract with your employee security guard who, according to the letter of the contract, was what things needed to be, but then the sort of social policy of like, okay, everybody understands that you actually need to do this, that, or the other is kind of the relay policy, right? So it's true that by sort of softly encouraging people at things in different ways, you could maybe get some different behavior out of your employees, and you wouldn't necessarily need to escalate to adding actual terms into their contracts that they can't misbehave. But because, again, it kind of cuts this cognitive dissonance that if somebody did do that, if they did change the contracts, then that would be evil, bad, attacker, like never to be considered kind of thing, right? So he is kind of trying to, he says like, well, there's no way to enforce in the contracts that people can only use Bitcoin in a certain way, but there is. That's what a hard fork would be, is you could literally just change the black and white terms that everyone has to adhere to. But instead, he's kind of like, well, we need to have it be money, but we can only do it via these kind of nudging people with the filter policies and so forth. It just doesn't really make all that much sense, right? I'm not doing a very good job necessarily of explaining it, but that's because it's kind of nonsense. Are you following me?
Yeah, it's weird though, because he seems to recognize there's some aspect of I guess like socialization that needs to happen, but like have it seems like a very like trust me bro attitude, which seems weird for a community that is often saying don't trust, verify.
Yeah, but we know that they don't verify shit, because otherwise they could just read the white paper and see that Satoshi was a big blocker and that, you know, you can, internet speeds have increased, so you can just, you know, double the block size and nothing bad will happen. And instead they have all kinds of, you know, adherence to these, high priests in Bitcoin Core, and whatever Adam Back says, you know, Eric Wall has to give a whole slide to Adam Back told me this idea wasn't going to work, so we didn't do it. You know, like there's not actually much, you know, verifying going on in any of this. Right. So anyway, you know, and you can listen to all those different clips, you know, and all the other debates links at the start if you want to really get into the details of all this. You know, the nuances of how much could node policy be effective in changing things. But like I said, it really just comes back to, if Bitcoin is going to be money, then you've got to enforce that by having a lot of people in the Bitcoin community, in this case, the BTC community, that are on the same page that it's going to be money. And then they can just set the rules of the network to be like that. But that's not the situation that he's in, because Bitcoin was supposed to be peer-to-peer cash, and so that's what the BCH community did. They was like, okay, let's just keep setting the rules so that that's the thing, and let's onboard people with that message that it's peer-to-peer cash, and then everything will just carry on great. Which, once there was enough, you know, sorting out the disagreements with Amorium, BSV and stuff, has been great. But he's in the situation of he wants BTC to be one thing, but other people want it to be something else, and the kind of the tool for the job that he needs is a hard fork, but he can't possibly conceive of that, because again, that would, you know, in his mind make him the evil bad guy Bcasher. And that's sort of the next slide. So, you know, there's a lot of like, who is the Bcashers in this scenario? And he has to constantly kind of go to the well of trying to say it's not me, I'm not the Bcashers in this scenario, even though he is, because he's the one who's fighting against the hijacked Bitcoin core that is trying to just constantly derail and confuse BTC from being an actual workable currency, right? So we've got a clip here about this.
Keep comparing us to Roger Ver and all these other people that are upset with Core. And I'm like, that's a really annoying one, right? Because we're asking Core not to break a filter. Can you just leave it, right? That doesn't make us the nut jobs that want to start, they want to turn an 80 byte limit into an 100,000 byte limit, right? I'm not the madman here saying, I'm saying, can you leave this alone, please? Obviously, I want my inscriptions filter, and they're not going to do that, or maybe they will, but I'm just telling them to leave op return alone. And the immediate crisis that we apparently faced that motivated all this, which is Citria saying we need their fake pub keys to be op returns, it's just, I don't care. It's a kilobyte a year. That is not a horror story justified in nuking these limits. It's just overblown.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't think you're Roger Ver. For one, this is not...
Hang on, just play that last little bit.
Anything to do with consensus. But...
You're muted.
Yeah, see, there you go. That's the key, right? Danny nails it, well, inadvertently at the end there, where Mechanic is trying to explain why he's not the Bcacher, because the Bcachers wanted to change things and he didn't want to change things. Remember, again, that changing physics, changing the red circle. And that's what Danny says as well. Like, yeah, true, I agree with you. So that makes you not the Roger Ver. But that's kind of missing it again. That's only looking at the technical details. The reason he's the Roger Ver, the reason he is the Bcachers in this scenario is because he's the one who wants to maintain a consistent mission. He doesn't want to, he thinks it's about maintaining a consistent set of technical rules, whereas the way BCH thought about it was maintaining a consistent vision, the soul of the Theseus's ship, in terms of it doesn't matter if you swapped out the wood as long as we're still going to the same point, the same place. And so he is upset in this whole situation. He feels like he's been rugged because he thought they were going towards digital gold layer 1 small blocks with Lightning Network somehow onboarding 8 billion people. And in the end, he's found out, no, actually, we're going to be doing 53% of JPEG storage and possibly even more. And his precious node is now just like Google Drive for any random like spammer in the world. And so he thinks that it's different, but it's completely not different. And I captured that by making this meme that seems to have been very popular. It's been reshared, it's been viewed a lot. And it's very ironic that I'm sort of making fun of him by saying, look, you're exactly just like us. But he has been speed running through all the same experiences of the BCH community, even though he doesn't want to acknowledge it. He's been censored on the GitHub and Reddit. He started accusing Peter Todd, Greg Maxwell, Matt Corallo, other core developers, and soon enough he'll get around to Adam Back of being, involved in bad acting and making these ridiculous arguments, and he can't get through to them. And how are they not on the same page as him? That they don't understand what Bitcoin is about, or they don't understand some critical elements. He's in disbelief that other people don't see his current situation as an existential Bitcoin threat. Of course, when Bitcoin Cashers were saying, look, if you go down this road, like that's it, it's going to be over. Like Bitcoin, we've only got one chance for P2P cash, and if you divert it off to this other, nonsense, then we'll never get P2P cash back. And at the time, him and others were like, oh, that's being over emotional, and we're mocking, Roger with the whole crying babies thing, which is not about the crying babies. It's just saying he was emotional, therefore he wasn't really accepting reality in the same way as I referenced to earlier, right? Which is like, you've got to take a stand somewhere. And so the Bitcoin Cash community was like, well, we need it to be peer-to-peer cash, right? So he's in that same situation of being like, how do you guys not see this? Like, if this goes the wrong way, that's it, we're fucked and it's over. So he's exactly the same as we were in that way. He's also getting drawn into these in-person time-wasting conferences. He went with Luke, and they had BTC++, which is exactly like scaling Bitcoin back in the day, where, okay, there's some chat, there's some things are said, there's a little bit of like what was said on Twitter versus what was said in real life. But at the end of the day, was anything changed? No, nothing changed. And so his time and effort and energy is being wrapped up in all of that instead of, getting to the core of the problem and actually fixing it. So you can be kind of gaslit and run around with those things for a while. No doubt there'll be further additions or or conferences or whatever. Just the same as the BCH community got dragged into a few of those, or the big block community as it was, until eventually they were like, wait a second, this is all just delaying. His attempt to resist is with knots and running their own client, just like people running Bitcoin XT, Bitcoin Unlimited, Bitcoin Classic. And he, of course, also has ocean mining, where it's like, well, look, we got to fix everything with ocean mining. Perhaps we can move things in the right direction there. Exactly the same as Jihan and Bitmain. And finally, of course, he's in denial about the fact that they just need to jam a fork in it. If he wants to have BTC mechanics vision, he's going to have to do it with a fork. At the end of the day, BTC is what it is. Again, there's no evading reality. There's just dealing with the consequences. And the reality is that BTC has been hijacked. It's controlled by power players and banking interests and so forth that do all they need to do to disrupt and confuse the little plebs and their, social narrative discussions and their little conferences and whatever. And that's just the reality. Of course, he can prove that it's not the reality. Like I said, if he's able to rally up this big resistance and save BTC and turn it back into layer 1 digital gold that is not getting overwhelmed with JPEG spam. But I really don't like his odds. And so, you can really just see like there's just two takes on it. His take is that, well, what's different this time? It's different because, again, the technical thing is that he wants to keep things as they are rather than change them, and that Bitcoin Core are now the bad guys when last time they weren't, because they sort of got rotten somewhere in the recent past. Whereas to me, it's obvious he's just not on the same side as the hijackers anymore. So that's why he's having a tough time keeping BTC on the track that he thought it was meant to go the whole time. So, of course, a lot of this comes down to what's going on in Bitcoin Core, which is the subject of the next slide. So we've got these 3 clips. The first one is him talking recently about Roger and about, the Bitcoin Cash sort of split and everything. And then the second is him reflecting a little bit on Bitcoin Core, the second and third ones. So just have a listen to this, and I'm pretty sure everyone will be able to hear the contradiction.
I mean, Roger calling Bcash Bitcoin on Bitcoin.com and calling actual Bitcoin Core, because you could buy Bitcoins on Bitcoin.com, but he was pushing Bcash instead of Bitcoin. And, Bitcoin Core is ridiculous, right? You're naming it after an implementation, not a protocol. That's just stupid. Like you could have called it BTC and BCH. Yeah. All right.
And do you think it was malice or just ignorant? No, like, do you think he believed in that Bitcoin Cash actually was Bitcoin? Like,
I think he was trying to he was not trying to cede linguistic territory. He was trying to insist on maintaining the lexicon as he believed it should be, and I can respect that. I actually can, even though it annoys me. I understand why you might want to do that. Like, I understand other contexts where people do similar things, where they're like, you're renaming a thing, and I don't agree with the direction you're taking it in. I believe you're stealing all the goodwill that exists around this concept, and I want ownership of that, and I think it belongs to this concept. I understand why he did that. I think calling it Bitcoin Core is really embarrassing, because I think he should have just gone with BTC instead of calling it Bitcoin Core. That was silly.
Words that come to mind are liberal, vaccine, what else? Woman. Like all of these things are people want to change the meaning of.
So there you go. Yeah. There you go. Exactly. So people can be kind of have the goalpost shifted on them. And the critical part was where he said, like, it's just so ridiculous that he conflated Bitcoin Core with Bitcoin, that one implementation is not it's not the main thing. So let's have a listen to these other two clips in under a week later.
Which is not Bitcoin. This is I find there's two perspectives on that. I find one of them is reality, one of them is ideology. Bitcoin Core is effectively Bitcoin. Even Bitcoin Knots is still basically Bitcoin Core. So, sorry, Stefan, to pause you in this horrific state. So, changing Bitcoin Core does in effect change Bitcoin. We know that.
But just for people.
And make you stop doing stuff. Again, I don't see any point in pretending we're not centralized on Bitcoin Core and that mining isn't already centralized. Centralization is really efficient if you want to bully people into doing what you want them to do. There is no point pretending we're decentralized in those realms when we aren't. And
so there you have it. Basically, the problem with Roger and with the evil Bcashers was that they were conflating Bitcoin Core with BTC. That's a narrative that he has in his mind. But then when you flip it around, when Antoine Poinceau is giving those arguments to him, suddenly, okay, guys, let's get down to brass tacks. Really, Bitcoin Core is driving the show. Whatever they decide is basically what Bitcoin becomes, and that's all there is to it, which is correct. But for many, many years, the big blockers were kind of gaslit and lied to that, oh, no, Bitcoin Core is not the key implementation. That's a lot of what the block size was happening. But then people were trying to make Bitcoin XT. They were trying to make Bitcoin Unlimited. And then that was an attack on Bitcoin. You weren't allowed to discuss it. You got banned off the Reddit and censored. And, people had their nodes DDoSed. And you got, all that stuff that happened, right? So it's like the same thing is happening to him, and that's just the clearest example that I could possibly provide of a contradiction in his logic and point of view that I don't think there's any getting away from, right? And I don't think that he's necessarily even aware of that. Like, I would be interested to hear his reaction from having those clips played back to back. They're literally within a week of each other, like not this most recent week, but he said one of them like 2 weeks ago, and then he said one of them about a week ago, right? So it's just so hard for him to see the truth because those two things are rubbing up against each other. To see the truth, he would need to recognize, and to his credit, he does say, look, I understand why Roger was doing what he was doing. He was trying to maintain a certain mission for Bitcoin, and that meant that he couldn't have the linguistic territory taken away from you, because if your enemy can define how words are used, then they can define the way you think, and they can define the ideological battlefield that you're in. But then at the same time, now he admits, okay, actually he had a point that whole time that Bitcoin Core is centralized and they just kind of run everything. The only other way out of that would be for him to try and split hairs and say, oh, well, it wasn't the case back then. Back then, Bitcoin Core was really, decentralized and everything. But now it's become centralized on these evil, bad actors, which is, again, that's just cope. That's just him believing that at the moment he caught on was when reality had changed. When it's like, no, reality changes, and then people catch on later to that and kind of need to backfill the information that they were missing. How are we doing so far? Yeah.
Oh, good. Is he a developer in any capacity?
That's a really interesting aspect of this, actually. He's not, in the sense that he's not a computer programmer or a Bitcoin Core developer or anything. And he constantly has to defend himself or kind of, downplay himself when he's saying, I'm not a developer and I'm, can't necessarily make a technical argument. But he works at Ocean Pool with Luke. He's, running nodes and stuff like that. It's not like he's not technical. And in the process of being in this entire situation for the last couple of years, advocating against Bitcoin Core, he'd learned a lot about it. So now he's actually a very effective technical advocate on most of the issues, especially related to this. But he constantly has to downplay himself and say, I'm not a developer, da-da-da-da-da. But then he will be like, Antoine Poinceau is just making up bullshit, because whenever they try and FUD him off, with for technical reasons, yada, yada, yada. And then it'll be like, no, there's no for technical reasons. It's really just the truth is A, B, and C, and just kind of lay it out. So he is starting to break through that ability to understand, the high priests of what the technical devs told me, in the same way that the BCH community were. It's just everything is rerunning. It's just the exact same. The BCH community was like, this is obvious bullshit. And then the BTC community were like, no, the devs say this and we trust them kind of thing. They are the technical authorities in Bitcoin Core. Please don't question them. And it's like, well, firstly, there was plenty of big block of devs who knew that was complete nonsense. They wrote plenty of information debunking it all. Gavin Andreessen did plenty. Everyone else did plenty. Peter Risen, etc. Everybody already debunked it. But even then, those weren't the recognized authorities. And then people would say, well, if you're not one of those devs, how do you know? And it's like, well, because you don't need to be a developer to get into the nitty gritty of all these different things. You can just reason it out for yourself once you have somewhat of an informed understanding from people who are technical, So, all right, next slide then. Okay, so they admit it now. Bitcoin Core is centralized, etc. So what? After many, imagine this. I wish you could just time capsule this back to like Reddit in 2015. Bitcoin Mechanic admits, small blockers admit that Bitcoin Core was centralized the whole time. All right, so what is the actual problem here? Like, Mechanic's fighting all this war with nodes and policy and et cetera, et cetera. What is his real problem? If I could give him some advice, like, what do you actually got to attack here? Well, the first problem is that nobody knows what BTC is. And of course, that's by design. So it was a P2P cash, then it was kind of changed into this digital gold. And now again, he and others are trying to sort of redefine it as this quote unquote monetary network. And that's why he's having so much trouble trying to convince everybody that he needs monetary use cases and how to draw the line between what is and isn't a monetary use case. Partly it's because he's been sabotaged, and partly it's because there's a lot of quote unquote shitcoiners that disagree with him. But it's also partly because for the last decade, BTC has been baking in this situation of BTC is kind of semi-ossified. It is what it is. And if you don't like it, like, go fuck yourself, right? BTC has no white paper. There is no actual document. And I even suggested that to him. It's to make a point, but it's not even a joke. Like, if he wants to get things back on track, he would have to write, okay, BTC, the monetary network, white paper. Here it is. It's going to be layer 1 nodes. Nodes are the priority. We need this, and we do not need to store JPEG data and etc. Of course, he can't do that because BTC just simply doesn't have a white paper. If you do that, everyone will be like, you're not Satoshi. You didn't start Bitcoin. You don't. Who are you to say what it is? But at the same time, they can't go back and say, well, look at the Bitcoin white paper. It says here no JPEGs and no non-monetary transactions. Because if they did that, they would be reading Bitcoin is a peer-to-peer cash system for fast, casual, layer 1 transactions that you just prune a lot of the data you don't need. And it doesn't say shit about Lightning Network or, whatever else. And of course, again, I've got to pre-bunk this one again. Yes, the white paper is not gospel. Not everything in it was, exactly how things need to be. But the point is, as a mission statement, it clearly says what we're trying to do. And there's plenty of evidence beside the white paper that layer 1 scaling was always the way it was going to work. And it was Bitcoin doesn't exist to help people run nodes. It's not Bitcoin a node running safety blanket. It's Bitcoin a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. So for that reason, that's what Mechanic is actually fighting. Even if he thinks he's fighting these shitcoiners and these relay people in his Bitcoin Core, no, what he's fighting is the fact that BTC is completely unmoored from any kind of vision. And with his rising prominence, he would actually be in a fairly good position to say, okay, guys, we need to get on the same page and we need to have a clear, vision of where we're going. But of course, that just is too hard to do because, he would need to write a white paper or have some kind of mission statement, because you can't just exist in this confused state of, it when you see it. It should be a monetary network, but not P2P cash, not the B caches, because they're evil.
I would love to see them do a white paper, because I think there'd be a lot of people, like, if you if you like whether or not he's saying we want to be a monetary network but not quite cash, or to say like no, we want to be digital gold, I think it makes it very clear, like, because you're absolutely right, it's not a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. And I think like the prevailing narrative for like a decade now has been towards this gold thing. So like I wouldn't buy it, but I think everyone in like all of the heavy hitters in BTC right now would be like, yeah, okay, sure.
No, because that undermines the religion though. If you do that, then that's a full capitulation on everything that the BCH community have been saying. That I love that it started at the time, like the block size where it was like, we're the real P2P cash and you're not. And that was what the other side said, too. And then over time, they've just slowly drifted away from that. And we're still like laser focused on it. And now it's got to the point that it's just not even a debate anymore. They have accepted, okay, we're going to be digital gold, we're going to be et cetera, but they still rely so heavily on where the original coin started by Satoshi with no pre-mine, etc. If you get to the point of rewriting your own white paper, you're giving up all that credibility and legitimacy that actually we weren't really the original coin. That was BCH, and we weren't really the ones with Satoshi's brilliant vision in mind, the genius inventor. Like, think about how disruptive that would be to everyone who, again, because that's what they feel like they've bought in on. And you could even put it in your new white paper. You could say, Satoshi had this great vision, but he got some of the details wrong, so we've kind of fixed and updated it. But then that makes them the shitcoiners who are the ones trying to rework the formula, just like Vitalik.
Yeah, maybe I'm already too involved because it seems like that's the case, right? Like, because I don't know how anyone looks at the title and then looks at the BTC network and goes, these are the same picture.
People don't look at the title. That's the thing. Like, I saw a thread recently of some BTC guy being like, I'm going to actually read the white paper. Like, I hear so much about it. Yeah. It was literally some guy who's like, I've been in Bitcoin since 2020 and it's like 2024 or 2025. I'm going to actually read the white paper. I don't think I'm going to learn anything new because I've read thousands of pages. I've read all the Bitcoin books and I've listened to the Bitcoin podcast and I've listened to my stuff. So I think I have a pretty good handle on it. I doubt I'll really learn anything new. And then he did the review, and I can't remember what his takeaways were, but he was like, "Well, I was actually surprised at how much stuff was in here that I didn't." I don't think he got to the reality of like, wait, the B caches were right. He didn't get that far, but he was kind of like, yeah, it was like 4 or 5 years of like, I've been a deeply indoctrinated pleb, and now I'm going to read the white paper. I don't think it will have info. And then he was like, shit, like there's a lot of interesting stuff in here.
It's so wild to think. Like, I remember my first meetups. One of the things that was planned in every meetup was, here's the white paper, and we're going to go through it. We're not going to understand any of it, but like, here's what it has to say.
Yeah. It's because it's just kind of like the Constitution of America. It's like anything. You need a vision. You need a founding document that kind of lays it out. That doesn't mean it's perfect for all of time, but it does mean that for the most part, you kind of want to stick to what you're doing. Otherwise, what are you doing? Yeah. And it's just as simple as that. And anyway. Like, okay, so that's one set of problems he's got, is that BTC doesn't really have a vision. That's a big problem. That's a big, problem that he has to tackle with everyone else. But he has a second problem, which he could actually fix only on himself. It's only a problem individually with him, which is that he believes a whole ton of enormous hoaxes about Bitcoin. And this again cuts back to the episode we did about the hoaxes and really the entire run of the Bitcoin Cash podcast, which is debunking all this complete nonsense, lies, and propaganda that there is. For instance, like nodes are the boss of miners, when really that's just secondary to the social phenomenon overlaying it. He thinks big blockers were this corporate takeover which would centralize the network, even though, like he literally just admitted in that previous clip, Bitcoin is centralized both, with the mining and the core. So, if you look back at the block size war, how does that make any sense? They were fighting off the evil centralized miners, but now we've ended up completely centralized with miners, and they were fighting off the evil centralizing devs, but now we have centralized Bitcoin core devs. Like, how did they end up with exactly the opposite of what they were fighting? And that confusion, for him to get to the bottom of it, he needs to realize not only that he believes a bunch of like complete bullshit, but that the people who told him about it were also just completely lying to him, or were just equally ignorant. Could be one or the other. That whole thing about hard forks are evil and bad, and that makes you the evil bad Bcashers. No, hard forks are not bad. That's how every cryptocurrency except BTC upgrades. It was also how BTC upgraded at several times, in the past. And it's not even a problem as long as you don't have a community split. If you have a split, that's bad. But again, it's still not the end of the world. It's just how cryptocurrencies evolve. Like, if people want to try their alternative version, they can do it. Like the BCH community is better off for the BSV community having fucked off to crash land their own project, right? In the short term, it was very painful, but in the long run, it's a good thing. It's the exact same. It's just open source. It's how open source code works. It's how biology works. That's literally just fun. Again, it comes back to evading reality. That's how reality works. So hard forks are not bad, especially not if you can get everyone on the same page and have quote unquote consensus. Then you can do an upgrade. It's not really a problem. But he, of course, believes those two words, hard fork, is evil, basically. And he believes that SegWit and Taproot were these great upgrades by the blessed devs, even though the situation he's in now is because they're all fucked up and they were all bad ideas. But of course, again, the cognitive dissonance around the BCH guys being the one who saw that ahead of time and dodged it is like insane. So if you have a look, and we've got a clip here to this effect, thankfully, he's starting to put the pieces together. And just in this video, literally today, it was literally this morning, here's him talking about SegWit and Taproot.
Used for something nothing to do with money. And the insult to all of this is that SegWit and Taproot were supposed to reduce on-chain bloat. They were supposed to mean that you could do way more with the same amount. And instead, the opposite has happened. The witness discount that was supposed to incentivize shrinking the UTXO set is being used by inscriptions, which tripled the size of the UTXO set in 2 years. It's completely fallen on its arse. When you go back and look at all the rationale and all the academic discussion about SegWit and Taproot, look at the stated objectives of all this stuff and see how we have failed. We blew up the UTXO set when the witness discount was supposed to shrink it. And Taproot was supposed to mean you could... it's not exactly masked, but it's supposed to mean that you can prevent a whole bunch of unnecessary stuff ending up on chain because you only have one path getting executed, which means you can do so much with Taproot without causing an egregious amount of space to be used up on the chain. And instead, 88% of what Taproot's being used for is dust outputs in service of inscriptions. So it failed, and now we look like idiots because every time we try and come up with a fantastic upgrade, this is going to mean Lightning, and this is going to mean Schnorr signatures, and this is going to mean that we use less space with a cooperative close of Lightning channels. All of these wonderful things that we're supposed to get from these upgrades, and all we did was end up trashing Bitcoin completely. And to make it, what really hurts is that we cannot clean up our mess. The fact that inscriptions became possible due to a bug in Taproot that then we got too gaslit to allow ourselves to fix is just an embarrassing stain on the entire history of this project. Because go back, like I said, back in 2016, we're saying we have new mempool policies. Miners, you need to adopt these for your own good.
Yeah, and then it goes on and on a bit, about that. But there you go. Some self-awareness is starting to hit in there. If Bitcoin Core were these smart, ultra mega devs that he listened to and all these smart guys, even like Luke Jr., he was on board with, he was the one who created SegWit. And then Taproot was this genius idea that he and everyone else, signed off on. It's like he's starting to wonder, like, how did we end up in shit? Like, if we did the right thing, how did it end up badly? And that question is just going to drive him insane until he finally thinks, again, I need to revisit some of my history. I need to drop some of my assumptions or stop thinking who was telling me that was lying or ignorant. And I need to start listening to somebody else who's maybe making a bit more sense. Not making sense from what I think now with my current view of the reality, but maybe they have a thing that actually explains it, And like he said, he kind of touched on it. He said, like, well, Taproot, we had that bug and we couldn't fix it. What he means is we couldn't have just hard forked that shit out of there because, like I said, that was the narrative that you weren't allowed to, you weren't allowed to say. And you're not, again, you're the evil Bcasher if you want to do that. but that would be how they would keep themselves on a path. And then he, at the end there, is sort of talking about how in 2016, you know, everybody did this because we were all going in the same direction. So everybody was on the same page with BTC. How did we end up in this fucked up, weird world? It's because, again, it comes back to they don't have a white paper. They don't have a founding vision. This quote unquote digital gold is nonsense that was all just cooked up as a huge psyop. It's never what Bitcoin was or how it works at a technical level or anything. It's all just bullshit. So it's really, you know, not going in the right direction until he reconsiders his assumptions. But I'm at least glad he has figured out that what they're doing is not working, and that the things that they're implementing are blowing up in their face, which is either a result of incompetence or malice. I don't care how he explains it, but either way, it means you need to start listening to somebody with a different opinion. Basically, that much is pretty clear. And yeah, of course, again, it all comes, you know, back to that slide with the mannequins manipulating each other. The issue is never the issue, you know. Was SegWit and Taproot, were they good or bad technically? Okay, we could debate about that. I'd say they were bad technically. But then you can really say, well, how did they get in? You know, who was the one who was so on board with those things? How come they've now all fucked us up? And how come we can't just fix those things? Where are those people who said, well, this is great, we got to do SegWit, we got to do Taproot, coming to ride to his rescue and say, hey guys, we got to fix this inscriptions bug? They're nowhere to be found. Maybe Luke Jr. is there with him, his one mate, but who are all the other people that were like, Taproot's going to be amazing and etc.? No, that was like Greg Maxwell and whoever, who is now on the other side to him, who is like, you know, gaslighting him up with a whole fresh batch of bullshit that he knows is bullshit because he's arguing with him on Reddit, and he sees that his arguments are falling apart until Greg just ignores him or moves on to the next thing, you know? And that was exactly what the Bcashers told him long ago. Greg Maxwell, Peter Todd, it's literally the same cast of characters, and he hasn't put the pieces of the puzzle together yet. Any questions about that, or we can crack on?
I've got one question, but I don't know if it's like actually, I think it's just tangentially related.
Yeah, let's hear it.
In my mind, Luke was always part of the hijacking. But hearing all this play out makes me seem like he's just kind of a useful, and I don't want to say idiot here, but like,
yeah, he's not stupid. He's not stupid in the sense of like technically, but again, he's just in way over his head, you know. He's just, and I think, yeah, at the time, I believe, you know, it's the same as like Tone Vays or like any of these guys, you know, he was in the right moment of time to, you just, you know, push them in the right direction, and then they do the damage on their own, you know. It's kind of one of those situations. But of course, again, that's going to be so hard for Mechanic to think through or figure out, because in his mind, Luke is this genius coder and really smart guy that he's kind of this misunderstood genius. Nobody really understands. And he has saved Bitcoin in the op return wars, and he saved it in the block size war by coming up with SegWit, and he, you know, saved it. And because he also thinks in his version of events, he was fighting against Bitcoin Core. Him and Luke were saying to Bitcoin Core, guys, we can't do a block size increase. You're not listening to us. SegWit is going to be the savior. And they weren't listening to him. And then they heroically got it through with their UASF. But yeah, it just comes back to the mannequins again. Like, if you were trying to sabotage Bitcoin at that time, what would you be doing? Well, there'd be all these different forks, all these different clients popping up, and you'd just be trying to maximize the chaos amongst them. And once you identified the one that was maybe the threat, then, you know, you would divert resources and
install a committee.
Yeah. And you would let one get through once you had decided where the problem was going to be, you know. It's like if you're pushing against a wall and then the wall just disappears and suddenly you get through. Well, that could be that you had a heroic effort and you shoved through the wall, or it could be that somebody else put the wall there and then they just took the wall away and let you pass, you know. But it looks the same from your perspective, right? And so that's just smarter, like, strategy. That's if you're being if you're being outwitted by somebody. It's the same if you're playing chess against somebody who is better than you. There's usually a moment where you're like, haha, I've got your knight, you know, and you're like think you've been playing some small little game and you feel like you've got to win. You move your whatever piece to take them, and then they're just like, yeah, checkmate. And you're like, oh shit, like I did not see that coming. That's because they're just playing one level higher than you. It's the same way. We're like, we got our USF through. No, that might be his history, but his history is not doing a very good job of predicting or explaining what's happening now. And if you instead look at it through the lens of, wait, it was just hijacked, and we were just the useful kind of idiots that were conveniently in the right place at the right time, and they let us through the gate when it was the right moment for it, it all makes a lot more sense. And so that kind of gets on to the next thing. So it's getting even worse. Like, as much as he has those problems, that's only the beginning of things. Full RBF is now in, which is, of course, a Peter Todd special. Who would have guessed that? Which he thinks was a great innovation and yada, yada, yada. But now he's ended up in a complete, mess. Again, they just keep mixing more different bits of sabotage in there. That's another one that he hasn't figured out yet. Money is, of course, flowing into ETFs constantly, and Michael Saylor. So they've already bought up tons of the UTXOs. So the incentive for anybody to do any kind of fighting off the JPEGs or whatever is constantly degrading because people are not running nodes. People are not holding their own UTXOs. They can't use it as P2P cash. So it's just getting worse and worse. Money is also going into the L2 shitcoiners, Citria and Taproot Wizards and whoever else, whoever is probably actually not, maliciously, but to some extent, they're just trying to find a way to make it work, to make BTC work. Probably also similar to him in terms of making it some kind of viable money. And their approach is, well, what is the ETH guys doing? They're a bit more technologically advanced. Maybe we need to copy them. And so they're trying to do that, and they're raising investment. So they're also just creating absolute chaos. They're not going anywhere. And then, of course, BCH is gaining momentum. As a result of all this, people are starting to clue into the truth. We're putting out lots of good information. Obviously, we're shipping upgrades like nobody's business and all that. People are basically starting to figure out that BTC has been a hoax the entire time. So his ability to get traction is also limited by that because people are increasingly going to compare it to another version of events and just say, and it's no wonder you're frustrated and not getting anywhere. Which is really the silver lining, is that not in the most recent videos, but in a couple, not too long ago, 6 months ago or something, I remember he said, like, I've come around a bit on the Bcash censorship. I realized that maybe they felt like they weren't being listened to. It's kind of similar to what, we had the Eric Wall clip years ago where it was kind of like, well, we're the bad guys. It wasn't quite that explicit, but he was sort of saying, okay, maybe there was more to that than I realized. Maybe, they were being shut out of the narrative, and maybe they had a few more points than I kind of, realized. And of course, now he's been getting heavily censored and cut out of the narrative himself. So I'm sure that has only increased his understanding of that issue. But he's also said, like, John Carvalho was maybe onto something when he was protesting the removal of the RBF options in Core, which was only a few months ago, which was, John Carvalho was saying, guys, we need to have at least zero conf, at least be an option. And again, they got it's just gaslighting and boiling the frog, same as ever, where when RBF was introduced, it was, guys, it's just going to be an option. It's just going to be an option. If you don't like it, you don't use it. It's just going to be an option. And then, of course, once it had been adopted enough, suddenly it was like, well, we got to take away that option because it's not helpful and it doesn't do anything. Exactly the same as the other kinds of filters. So he said, like, okay, now that I'm in this situation with the filters, I can kind of see where John Carvalho was coming from about these options, boiling the frog. So there's rays of hope in there that he is maybe, rethinking things a little bit.
It almost feels like a consequence of being, again, I don't mean this offensively, but like a midwit. Like if you didn't understand the technicals and you look at Bitcoin, you're going to be like, give me the one that's money, right? At least I would. I would say I'm on the lower end of the IQ spectrum of people involved here, and I look at it and I go, give me the one that's money. And then I think the logical extension, like if you're on the other side of the bell curve is also like, what's most useful to people? And the answer to that is money.
Yeah.
And so we're stuck with like.
Oh, you mean that? Yeah. I see what you're saying. Well, that's it. It's just Peter Pickett, and it's so perfect because BCH is basically like the high IQ guy, and BSV is basically the dumb idiot guy who was just like big blocks, like just big blocks, bigger blocks, the biggest blocks. We've got the biggest blocks in BSV, you know, and they're still going. And then all the BTC guys, which again was the majority of people, it was the thickest part of the bell curve, was the ones who were like, no, trust the devs, small blocks, etc. Lightning will save us, etc. But of course, reality is driven by the extremes rather than by the middle, you know. So they were able to, you know, fool most of what, you know, like I've said before on the show, right? You can fool everyone some of the time, some of the people all the time, but not everyone all the time, right? So it's the same thing. BCH just snuck around it. Bitcoin did its thing. You only need a minority of people who understand what's going on to keep the chain alive, and that was good enough. So that's kind of, yeah, where we're at with that, I think. But yeah, he's definitely getting frustrated. We have, again, from just this morning, he posted this tweet, quote, "There is no room for debate anymore. The inscriptions hack is vicious attack on Bitcoin. The tools exist to prevent it, but rather than adopt it, Bitcoin Core simply want to open up an additional mechanism of attack. This cannot be tolerated," end quote. And Reardon, shout out to him. He was getting in there good. He replied with, "Enjoy your fork coin," which really just gets to the heart of the issue. And then Mechanic replied saying, quote, "I have no intention of changing consensus rules, you fool," end quote. Again, goes back to those same copes about being the evil B casher who wants to change consensus and the red circle. And then Reardon said, quote, "Oh, good. Guess we're on the same page here and aren't going to do anything about quote unquote spam. Maybe we can merge the op return fix and get back to serious conversations and improving consensus," end quote. So this is where he's really running into problems, is because you can be on Twitter saying, "Yeah, I'm not going to tolerate this. I'm not going to put up with this." But at the end of the day, it's voice or exit. You know, you try voice, you complain about a situation. At a certain point, if things are not going the way you want, you have to just leave. It's everything in life. Voice and exit. There's only two ways to change a system. You can complain, or at a certain point you can leave. And that's all there is to it. And the voice can only escalate up to a certain point. You know, you can say, "I'm not going to tolerate this. I'm not going to tolerate this. I'm not going to tolerate this." But if you say this too many times and you don't follow through and actually stop tolerating it, actually, you know, kicking things up a gear, then people learn to just tune you out because it just becomes the boy who cried wolf. So here he is saying, "There's no room for debate. These guys are just malicious attackers, etc." And it's like, well, what's the next resort? The next thing is you're going to have to split the chain. You're going to have to do it the Bcash way. But he's also just preemptively taken that off the table for himself. So that's, again, that nexus between, you know, reality and frustration just building up against each other until one of them has to break. Either reality has to just stampede him and he just has to accept, okay, now it's a JPEG chain, or he will have to reconsider whether or not this was all sort of, you know, propaganda about BCH. So we already, like we said, have seen this play out before. So we kind of know actually what's going to happen next. And here's my predictions. And we can all watch for these. If these start to come true, then, you know, our explanation of reality is making sense. And if they don't, well, maybe Mechanic's version of the heroic UASF has a bit more to it. So to be fair to Mechanic, he's done a pretty good job getting about 10% of people running knots on the network. So there is some organic traction for, again, his vision of Bitcoin and what he thinks, you know, should be done. But the reason I think it's impressive, and it shows at least there's an intolerant minority that are hardcore, but the big problem is that we've seen this before in the block size war. Like I said, Bitcoin Classic got up to about 20 or 25%, and it ultimately wasn't enough. So what is likely to happen here is that pushback ramps up, but indirectly and difficult to pinpoint. So in the same way as the big blockers discovered, okay, things just kind of stop working. Again, it's not really like the hijackers are not going to launch some full-on frontal attack. Instead, they're just going to find little ways to undermine the situation of what he's doing, like holding more stalling conferences, maybe Blockstream, who were not too long ago raising like $2 billion. Like they previously raised hundreds of millions of dollars for products and services that are just vaporware and never existed. Of course, it was just payoff from the banks to undermine Bitcoin. They're going to start quietly funding some opposition, which will maybe only come out later. Maybe it'll be like, you know, after this is all over in 2 or 3 years, it'll be like, wait, Blockstream donated 100 million to this project who were somehow instrumental in tanking knots or like disrupt, or a competitor to Ocean mining pool suddenly pops out of nowhere with suspiciously no funding that is suddenly, you know, competing in their niche or like something like that, right? You'll probably have more censorship and communication disruption. They're already getting a big load of that on Reddit. But maybe there'll be further attempts for that. Maybe Adam will come in on Twitter and, you know, shit talk him a few times or try and keep him out of the narrative. Somehow we're likely to maybe see Potemkin alternatives to knots. So when BCH was getting started, of course, some were being created in terms of SegWit 2x, which was, you know, maybe a good faith effort. And then there was also all those other ones like Bitcoin Diamond and Bitcoin Triple Plus, or they made like 50 Bitcoin Gold. They made like 50 different ones, which were all just completely fake scams to basically, you know, distract from BCH as being the actual competitor. So we might see some Potemkin alternatives to knots being created. We might see some more pressure on miners. So again, that was a lot of what happened in the block size war was, okay, we're going to, you know, undermine things with these secret meetings with the miners or trying to talk about things behind the scenes, this, that, and the other. We might see some of that. Of course, they already have Ocean. So maybe Mechanic will see that coming. Maybe he'll hear, you know, word on the grapevine among the miners, or maybe he won't. Maybe they'll, you know, smartly target the ones that are already more opposed to him and, you know, make sure they have plenty of miners on the side of keeping the JPEG train rolling to disrupt him. Perhaps Michael Saylor gets more involved, or other big figures. You know, we've already seen Greg Maxwell appear back from the dead in order to disrupt the narrative. Maybe they, you know, put the word out to other quote unquote influencers who, again, their main job will just be to muddy the waters.
Get another video
more than
from
anything.
BlackRock.
Yeah, and maybe something like that. The ETF, maybe the ETF suddenly have a big announcement. Oh, we've put another 100 million into this or that. Hooray! Like something more to ossify things a little further. And of course, finally, people will correctly keep telling him, just fork off then. If you're not happy with the way things are going, fork off. And that is ultimately the answer. If he isn't happy, that's what he has to do. If he can't get anywhere with his nodes, and even though the nodes has been growing, his frustration is growing. So he clearly feels the pressure because, again, the longer time goes on, like they didn't just jam a fork in it when the inscriptions bug was first found, and they haven't done it yet here either. And time is always ticking, so it's going to get harder and harder to, you know, have up, like people eventually get bored and moved on. So he's going to have a harder and harder time of getting momentum on an alternative. So how does this end? I've got 5 listed end games. We're going to see one of these 5 things, or maybe in different, combinations, basically. So the first option is that Mechanic can save BTC with the nodes. He can get things back on track to layer 1 scaling. I think that's without splitting it, getting control of the ticker, etc. I think that's basically impossible. That's just nonsense. That's not going to happen. But if he does do it, then I'll admit, oh, wow, he must have known something I didn't, and he was right to persist despite my doubts. And we'll all have learned quite a lot about BTC, and that will be quite an interesting thing if it does happen, because then maybe they have some kind of a workable project if they have, you know, something like that. But yeah, I'm not expecting that. Okay, number two. What are the odds?
Yeah.
0.5%.
Okay.
Maybe. And that's just on my my self-doubt that all the hijacking and everything we've seen in Bitcoin was wrong and the UASF node was the right story the whole time. Like, the reason I can't give that any higher is because our ability on this show to consistently predict what's going to happen next in Bitcoin has been like spectacular. So we've had a lot of confirming evidence. But it's possible. Definitely possible. Okay, number 2 is to just capitulate. Okay, he whinges and moans on Twitter a little bit, never actually goes any harder than that, and time passes and eventually he finds some kind of reason to just put up with it or accept it. You know, he's kind of said, and I couldn't find the clip, but it was in that Twitter space that we played at the start. He kind of said at one point, like, guys, this is it. Like, if we don't win here, like, it's over. BTC is basically fucked and done. So he's kind of clearly aware that the stakes are that high, at least from his point of view. I mean, the irony is the stakes are not actually high at all because that's not even the real Bitcoin. So it doesn't matter whether they save it or not. It's already dead. But anyway, in his mind, this is their one chance. But he could always, of course, you know, cope his way back into, okay, we have JPEGs, you know, let's go along to get along kind of thing. I don't think that's likely. He's too much of a warrior, but there's a chance of that, maybe 5 or 10%. Okay, number 3 is that he just rage quits. Like, this is the Mike Hearn outcome from the block size war. Like, he gets involved in all this, is trying to make changes, etc. And like you said, guys, this is it. It's not working. We lost. I'm out. Fuck you all. Like, that could be one way that it goes. You know, this one's got, well, now I'm trying to think, between these 5, I've got to add these up to 100%. Holy cow.
No. I think, like, you don't need to. There's always the people are completely irrational. Like, God knows he could do something that we can't even imagine. I don't know. Maybe he's all of a sudden an Ethereum guy, right? Like,
oh, true. Yeah. Well, true. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, true. Oh, that's another option, I guess. But I don't see that happening. I think he would rage quit before he switched to Ethereum. Anyway, so yeah, he can just rage quit and be like, okay, this is not happening, and just quit crypto or quit Bitcoin, at least publicly, you know, not be as involved, kind of write up some manifesto, the resolution of the digital gold experiment, you know, something like that, and kind of, you know, throw in the towel at some point. I think this one is like fairly likely because if he doesn't win, then he's lost, and I don't see him capitulating and just accepting it. He's put too much force into it emotionally and Bitcoin over the years that this is a very high likelihood that he would just blow up and be out of there. So maybe I would have to say maybe like 60% on this one. So let's say virtually nothing on option 1, maybe a 10% chance of capitulating. I'm upping the odds there. 60% chance of a rage quit. Then you have number 4 is a minority split. So this is the path BCH went down. So that's a hard road, though. That's a hard road. Then he has to admit, I was the Bcash shitcoiner. He has to get together with Luke. They have to make knots or something else, but probably knots into some kind of... They would probably even do it with a soft fork, technically, to try and, you know, cope. But at the end of the day, if you're splitting the chain into, who cares if it's a hard or a soft fork? At the end of the day, you don't have the ticker, you don't have the liquidity. Nobody gives a shit about your shitcoin project. You're going to get dumped on by everyone else. The price is going to go to nothing. You get ignored and thankless. And if he wants to go down that route, well, it's him in 10 years, because just like BCH has persisted through 10 years, we're still here. We've done a ton of upgrades, and that's how long it takes for everyone to get, you know, some good momentum going again. So maybe, you know, 2035, I'll have him on the show to talk about holy Bitcoin, but they don't have that kind of time because BCH is already rolling anyway. But they could do a minority split. It's not going to happen. You know, that's like a less than a 5% chance. As I look at this, I want to put rage quit and capitulate are the two most likely. So it's got to be like 70% rage quit, 20% capitulate, 5% minority split, 5% defect to BCH, or 4.5% and 0.5% the node save BTC. So that's the last option, is he can defect to BCH. He can listen to the show, think about it, go through an insane amount of reworking his worldview and emotional investment in BTC over the last decade and a half, and realize, shit, this has all happened before, and it's all going to happen again. You know, the universe is cyclical. The Bcashers were right. I need to binge watch the BCH podcast. And actually, the only way out is to defect to BCH. That's going to be the only way to have an actual monetary global system based on Bitcoin. Like, I was lied to about small blocks and everything. I was lied to about Bitcoin Core. Luke Jr. might be pretty invested and pretty, you know, good at writing node code or whatever, but he also doesn't really understand Bitcoin and was just a bit of a propagandized idiot in that respect, even if he was smart and passionate in others. I don't know. There's no chance. He's, you know, clearly at least a little bit interested in my content and commentary, so his mind is not fully shut off to it. So yeah, I think that's it. What would you put these percentages at?
Ooh. Okay, so like, I don't think one is gonna I would put that at like 0.0000001% or something, like just margin of error, pointless to even consider.
Okay.
I almost think the same with, like, I don't know. It's really hard for me to understand his perspective, but I'm not convinced that, I'm not sure what's worse between the minority split or defecting to BCH, because defecting to BCH like seems less bad because you still have the history to the Genesis block, and there's still like some potential plausible, I guess, deniability. I don't think that's the right context here, but I think everyone understands what I'm trying to say. But if you're doing a minority split, like,
well, you're just Bcash 2.0.
Yeah, even worse, because like
a lot worse, because the UTXOs has already been. It's like you're behind a decade of opportunity cost. Everyone who's bought into BTC is going to be like, this is definitely the shitcoin. At least BCH at the time, it was kind of in doubt, and there was a chance for it to work out, right? And he acknowledges that, like Roger and etc. You know, why was he branding Bitcoin that way? Because at that time, it literally was not clear that BTC was going to be the one who became Bitcoin. You know, BCH was number 2 in market cap at a certain point. It nearly flipped the hash rate. It almost did happen. But if you do it now, no, you're dreaming. Dreaming.
Yeah. So like, I think defecting to BCH is incredibly low, but like, I don't know, you know, I've never, I have not had conversations with him. I don't know how involved he is in the podcast. I've never really seen him poke his face up. So I would say that's like 2% or something like that. And then minority split would be like 1%, if that, which really just leaves capitulate or
rage quit.
Yeah,
that's right. well, that just comes down to his personality, because it's the same thing. Capitulate and rage quit are the same thing. Ultimately, it's just a difference of emotional reaction. Do you know, suck it up but stay involved, or do you suck it up but you're not involved? Like, you're just out of the equation, you know?
Yeah. And if you're involved for like some kind of protest, is it worth, like, what else do you have? Like, I feel like capitulation is kind of the highest. I would actually bet money on it. Like, I'd bet a coin on it.
Do you want to do it? Oh, you bet a BCH on that.
Yeah.
Do you want to take capitulate against I get everything else? Rage quit, minority split, defect.
What's our timeline?
Mechanica nodes. It's got to be what, like 1 year? Like, because if there's not some action by the time we've shipped the next upgrade, like, we can settle it at Bliss next year.
Okay.
If he hasn't, so if kind of nothing has changed and he's still just whinging on Twitter, and they haven't tried to set up a split, they haven't started talking about doing a fork, they haven't defected to some of the altcoin, and they haven't kicked out Bitcoin Core convincingly or something, then it's a win for you. But if any of that other stuff happens or something we don't predict, then I win.
Well, hold on, because I'm not sure I'm okay. Like, I think the conversation of a fork will come up. I just don't think it'll happen.
Okay. Well, that would be a hard one to judge. We'd have to get a moderator. We'd have to get a third party person. Anyway, maybe we just don't need to put money on it. Like we can. Again, I also think
we need to get a bunch of people to put money on it.
Where's the prediction? Where's BCH Guru with this?
Yeah,
let's get them in the mix.
His Twitter feed is the Oracle. Like,
and then he like games it. Like he posts like "fuck Bitcoin, I'm out," and then like deletes it like 30 seconds after all the bets pay out. So I don't know. So you're like 95% chance pretty much between capitulate and rage quit, and really it's same, you know?
Yeah.
All right. Can we run a poll? Like maybe we should run a poll on this after on Twitter. We can run a poll. We'll put capitulate and rage quit. We'll put them in we'll do it in the comments of the episode, and we'll make capitulate and rage quit the same option. And I think minority split. I think defect to BCH also needs to be defect to altcoins. I can't see him doing that, but like
maybe Monero, right? There's always that like sibling ship.
All right, because you only got the 4 options. Then you've got they save Bitcoin, capitulate / rage quit, like they're out, minority split themselves, or defect to BCH or Monero. Those are the options.
Saving Bitcoin is wild to me. That is also that like Reardon is on the other side, being like, enjoy your fork coins when you're campaigning for OpCat and
CTV. CXFS, whatever.
Yeah. I was trying to think of what he called it.
Yeah.
I don't think either of them are going to get anywhere. Like,
no, of course not. Of course not.
Roman
and that's it. Yeah, exactly. And it's just the marionettes. It's the same thing. Like that just serves the agenda perfectly. The more infighting and the more chaos and stuff there, and they've even developed those copes where they're like, Bitcoin is for enemies. We know it's working because everybody's in disagreement. Like, what kind of maladjusted like mentality is that? It's working when everybody is fighting and nobody's getting what they want. Like, okay, if that's how you're going to say that's what decentralized is, that's nonsense.
It's a waste of
like
time.
That's nonsense. Like a lot of things can be decentralized without being a shit fight of everybody involved.
I don't want to recreate democracy here. Like I don't need the checks and balances. We need shit that works well for the people.
Yeah. All right, so we got meme of the week. Jerry kind of summed it up quite well. And this comes to the previous slide. He said, BCH is the real Bcash, not this Knots knockoff, which that just summarizes it all right there, doesn't it? You know, like BCH was the ones who are originally fighting to preserve the Bitcoin vision. And it's ironic because it was BCH is the real Bitcoin. But now BCH is the real Bcash. Knots is not only not the real Bitcoin, it's not even the real resistance to maintain the real Bitcoin. It's just a copy. So they can't fork off, they can't do shit. So what's their Bcash 2.0? Oh man, feels bad. And then I don't know. We got another meme of the week as well too. I had to mix something at least into this show that was not related to this whole drama, although it kind of is. This is this guy Gainsey, who I'd never even heard of, but he's some guy in crypto saying how much ETH sucks, and it's pretty funny. Let's have a listen.
Currency do you think they'll use?
Everyone, the Ethereum Foundation is a piece of shit retard. Vitalik literally looks for the most retarded people and then hires them. He's like, "Are you a virtue signaling retard? You're hired." As a matter of fact, here's the treasury. Give out grants to more retards. Wow, I can't believe ETH is dying. I can't believe no one's using it. ETH is such a fucking joke. Like, ETH is a joke, Vitalik's a joke, the foundation's a joke, everyone they've hired is a joke. Everyone of or relating to it is a joke. The KOLs pushing it are jokes. Bankless fucking joke. Just everyone within ETH, every .ETH is just trash. There's no one that's in that web that isn't just complete fucking trash. And the sad thing is a whole lot of us held, we fucked up, but we own up to it. Like, you're not going to be telling us about ETH and having us defend it. No, we there's nothing to defend. We fucked up. Then you have these retarded .eths. They will still defend it. They're like, oh, you're funding it. You know what that means? It's the bottom. And they say this like every week for like 2 years. You've got to be a special kind of retard to keep saying that and keep being publicly wrong. You can literally pull up an ETH chart, pull up their tweets, paste them on, superimpose them, and it's like worse than 50 IQ. It's not even left curve. You have to go like, I don't know, 6 sigma to the left to find out how retarded they are. It's worse than special ed. There should be a new Special Olympics for these retards. I don't know where they belong. Just lock them away and never let them tweet. Never let another human being interact with them. It's worse than like rat poison.
So there you go. That's just to tie things together in the sense that, we've said on this show about how ETH is kind of falling apart a little bit. Kind of the same deal. They don't really have a coherent vision. They're just changing the narratives to ultrasound money or digital oil or whatever. There's a new one every week. And that's, of course, not working out for them. Their price has been falling against BTC. And, of course, they're starting to get the idea, okay, maybe if I wanted fiat gains all along, which is what he's talking about, then I should have just stuck with the network effect of captured BTC. And in the same way, that's kind of Mechanic's choice. Does he want to be part of the captured coin that the number goes up for at least a little while longer? Or does he want to fight for an actual vision? Does he have an actual vision that he wants to realize and change the world? Because if he does, it's join BCH or get working on your hard fork block. That's the only ways it's going to go down. Okay, very quickly, just a couple of other bits of news. Bliss went great. Everyone really enjoyed it. I loved seeing Milan and Nikolai there from Nano. That was cool. Peter Risen seemed to have a great time. Sally Mayweather had a great time. Parity USD got announced by Matthew. We've got a whole bunch of we'll publish all the videos from that soon. People were asking whether or not we're going to do it in Ljubljana or relocate. That's still under discussion, but I'll give an update about that, when we have it. And very briefly, Coinbase recently got hacked and released tons of private user info. So again, don't use those custodial services if you can avoid it. And Paytaka has announced a $6 million quote-unquote raise, that's my wording, with their new Lyft community token. So look into that if you're interested in maybe investing in what Paytaka's got going on. Seems like very interested, and they're doing various rounds for people in the community and so forth. So if you haven't seen that cross your radar, keep an eye on it. Okay, skip the next slide and straight to message to the community. What do we think the BCH community needs to hear? It needs to be messaged to Bitcoin Mechanic, really. It doesn't need to be messaged to the community.
Yeah. We're killing it. We're doing a great job. Pat yourselves on the back.
Yeah. I think things are going great. I think things are going great in BCH. And I think this kind of stuff happening, like we're not involved. That's the thing. I don't care. Whatever all those different options are, doesn't really matter. Like, it's not no skin off my nose. I'm just going to keep spreading BCH adoption. We're just going to keep making progress, and that's all there is to it, really, right? Like, this stuff is good to watch, and I, get involved to the extent of putting out information about it and updating about it, because the BCH community needs to know about these things so that you don't look like an idiot if you're going to a crypto meetup or if you're talking to BTC people or whatever. And there's a lot we can learn from it too. A wise man, learns from others' mistakes. So there's a lot of value to it in that sense. But I think we're doing great. And I've been very glad that we haven't even had time on the show to do this episode until after Bliss. Like there was all going on for weeks beforehand, but we could only we had the Jason Dreiser one, we had Bliss, and we only got around to it now is because our agenda is so full up with more important shit than all this drama. But my heart does go out to Mechanic. I feel you, mate. I went through it myself, accepting that BTC had been successfully hijacked and that the way forward was going to involve quite a bigger journey than I'd ever initially realized. How high the actual mountain is to spread peer-to-peer adoption to 8 billion people, despite the pushback of both very intelligent and very well-funded, operatives. Maybe pick up a copy of Hijacking Bitcoin. Maybe go back and listen to the hoax episode. you can listen to it on episode 119. Skip to 45 minutes in, start listening, and maybe listen to that one we did about the Taproot Wizards, the inscription stuff, episode 80 as well too. How crazy is that that was like 2 years, two and a bit years, and 3 upgrades ago? Like, isn't that nuts?
It doesn't seem like it's been as long as it has. Like I think it was yesterday I was telling Alex, like, I got into Bitcoin in April of 2016, and yet it feels like it's just like 3 years ago, right? Like it's been almost a decade.
Yeah. Time's always moving on. That's the other thing, and I said that before, like sand is always running through the hourglass. Like that's where Reardon and Mechanic, they're in the same boat, is that they both don't have that sense of urgency. Like it's now or never, guys. Like it actually is just fucking now or never, because every single day you wake up, it's a new day. The sun's gone around the earth another time and whatever. And you're just kind of like, shit, we're still captured and still bickering over this same CTV nonsense or the same whatever. Like, just go watch the Bliss streams. That's what it looks like when you're winning. That's like people are having ideas. They're launching new projects. Upgrades just ship. There isn't even that much fanfare because it's like, yep, got it in. Good stuff, guys. On to the next one. What are we delivering next year? Bitcoins for enemies. Drop all that like cope. And get involved in Bitcoin Cash basically, because we would love to have your talents and effort. But if this kind of presentation is not convincing to you, I don't know what will be. And or feel free to just crack on, prove us wrong. Just save BTC from the hijackers. But yeah, your track record not looking too good on that front so far. But maybe you know something we don't. Keep evading that reality. Okay. All right. Fund Me contributors, episodes 146 to 155. You can still donate, actually, if you want to. Majamali Marcelo, Funding Father, Molecular, the show we love, at Cash Stamps, BCH for the win, Cash Dragon, RealBitcoin.cash, Murray Store, great work, Burning a Cattle, Bitcoin is Cash, Milton Friedman, Emergent Reasons, Stay Grounded, Grow Big, Canach, BCH is the Michael Jordan of crypto. Yeah, beer. Keep building while BTC fights and stagnates. Very appropriate comment, actually. The stage is set for MOE plus SOV. Must obsolete. East first. True. Purely peer.cash. Discover the thrill of quest hunting, finding hidden cash drops, and collect BCH. And Doremus, keep building. You have full support from many. Okay, thank you to our donators. Thank you to our patrons, Ricky and HP, and our sponsors. Check out bchbull.com. Thanks for watching. The Start Guide FAQ and links are at bitcoincashpodcast.com. If you're new, listen to episode 85. If you don't know about the narrative hoaxes and all that stuff, listen to episode 119. If you're interested in the Taproot inscriptions bug and how that all got rolling, listen to episode 80. Try Celine Wallet at celine.cash. Final shout outs.
I got a bunch. So first off, not quite a shout out, but I do want to clarify something because this is the second time I've got this week. Rob, I'm not high. I'm literally getting over a flu. Shout out to you. Shout out to Bit Architect and everyone at BitGree for the work that they did on that platform. It is absolutely saving my ass right now. Shout out to everyone that I spoke to at Bliss that was like, yeah, quit your job. Like, do your own. That was fantastic. The Bcash GPT, the organizers of essentially the whole community. It's been a fantastic couple weeks, and let's keep the momentum up.
Yeah, my shout out goes to everyone who was at Bliss, actually, because it was amazing. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed meeting everyone. One of the moments that stuck with me was, I can't remember who specifically it was, but you know who you are. Somebody came up to me and they shook my hand and they said, Jeremy, I've been listening to the podcast for a little while and you are exactly like you are on the show. And I just thought that was so funny. I don't know what they were expecting, but whatever they got was clearly exactly what they expected. And I just think that's so funny because, this show, it literally is just you and me, and we just put on the cameras. There's no big, behind the scenes. There's no manipulating the narrative. There's no I fake it on camera and then when the cameras are off, suddenly I'm this introvert. Some famous people, not that I'm really that famous, but some people have those dual personalities where in public they're one way and then other times they're not or whatever. But like that's not true. Like there's none of that. It's not fake. It's literally just like straight out of my soul, straight to you. So I found that a very encouraging comment and really enjoyed that. So thank you for that. And I was glad to meet everyone as well. Okay, that'll pretty much do it. We'll see what the reaction is. If you're on Twitter, you can go. I'll put up a poll with those 4 options. We'll see what the people have to say, if they can predict. And we'll check in probably after Bliss next year, just like we had the narrative episode. Now we've had Bitcoin mechanics and the architects of spam. If BTC hasn't fully collapsed in a fiery conflagration in 12 months' time, we'll be able to check in and see how the mental gymnastics are coming along in terms of them getting to the reality that they've all been lied to and propagandized, and Bcash has told them so. So that's it. Thank you all for listening. Till next time. Oh, one to Smooth Operator.
Okay, hold on. You want to say that again?
Yeah. Shout out to Smooth Operator for our song, which is the Free Ross song, right?
Yep.
Banger. All right, let's hear it.
To Donald, release Roger from prison. Hurry up, bro, soon it'll be all season. Here, cash, that was the vision. But they locked him up, cause they fear his mission. Dog Bitcoin Jesus, straight from the start. 2011, spreading the spark. Told him the bank's gon' keep y'all in chains. Now he's in a cell where McAfee's name remains. More regulators hate when the people got power. So they set traps, watch them all turn sour. Spain got him locked, extradition in sight. For what, selling freedom? Nah, that ain't right. And they hate BCH cause it moves too fast. No middleman, fees no Wall Street tax. Now they got him shackled, trying to shut him down. But the blockchain's still running underground. To Donald, release Roger from prison. Hurry up, bro, soon it'll be all season. Here, cash, that was the vision. But they locked him up, cause they fear his mission. Dope boss can't hold a decentralized mind. The state wanna break him, but they way behind. 2024, it's a brand new race. Fiat's burning, they trying to save face. Inflation robbing every man and his soul. Meanwhile, BCA still playing his role. They print trillions, stealing your wealth. While Roger sitting in a cell by himself. The elites want control, they don't want you free. That's why they took them, same thing they did to McAfee. They silenced the ones who exposed the game. But Bitcoin Cash still carry his name.
Authorities in Spain have detained Roger for U.S. officials seeking extradition for alleged tax crimes. The same facility where John McAfee was found dead in 2021. Some say this is politically motivated, but boom, beat drops again.
To Donald, release Roger from prison. Hurry up, bro, soon it'll be all season. Here, cash, that was the vision. But they locked him up, cause they fear his mission. They scared of the truth, they scared of the chain. But BCH gon' break through the pain. Freedom ain't free, the war ain't done. They took Roger down, but the people ain't won. Roger, free Roger, free Roger, free Roger. Boy, cash is freedom. Roger, free Roger, free Roger, free Roger. Boy, cash is freedom. In the tyranny. Big Don O'Reilly.